Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dylan. This is All You Can Board, and today I'm going to be talking about 9 games that I have not yet played that I'm pretty sure once I do, you will see them in my top 50 games of all time. Now, this is basically a fancy way of saying these are the games that are the biggest gaps in my mind in my board game history that I haven't played, that I've been asked about, that I've considered getting at different times or playing at different times and just haven't, but that I'm sure that once I do, I'm going to love them, or at least love them enough that they can make my top 50, which is a pretty large amount of love. So, because we have played a lot of games. So, there's obviously I could have picked 20 games that had the chance. I tried to really narrow this down to the ones that I was most certain would eventually find their way on, even if just for a brief, for a year before they get bumped for something else. But I did rank them from 9 to 1 in terms of how likely I think it is that they'll end up. Because obviously with any of these, I'm guessing. Any of these games I could play, and I could have gone in thinking, oh, this game is going to be one of my favorites of all time, and then played it and found out, actually, that didn't land for me the way I thought it did. That's happened with other games in the past. It's obviously always disappointing, but I can never be 100% certain. So this is just my best guesses on these. You may not find them all on my top 50 next year and the year after once I play them, but that's just where I kind of landed with them right now. So the other thing I want to mention is that the way I approach board games that I haven't played and games that I'm anticipating, board games specifically, is very different and in kind of opposition to how I approach pretty much every other medium in the world that I get hyped for. So like video games, movies, television shows that I'm like really anticipating, seasons of shows, things like that are coming back. The way I, look forward to those is I basically consume every piece of content I can, to the point I end up having to stop myself because I'm finding I'm spoiling myself with trailers and things like that. But generally I'm so hyped that I just want to consume all this content to be surrounded by it, and then I'm anticipating that release date. Whereas board games, even though I am just as, I'm anticipating them just as much as any other medium, there's something I love about getting a new board game. And that's the moment that you open the box, take out the rule book, and I kick back on the couch and basically discover these rules, learn this language, and basically discover everything there is about the game while looking at the board and the cards. And I don't like the idea of robbing myself of that by spending a bunch of time reading the rule book from start to finish, from PDF document beforehand, or, looking into every single mechanic about the game so that when I get the box, it's essentially like I'm just ready to go. That might be the most efficient way. It's just not the way I like to approach board games for some reason. So you'll notice with some of these games, I have a vague idea of like, oh, I know it has this mechanic or there's this element that attracts me to it, but I don't know the full rules of many of the games on the list. There's some I might know more than others, but some of them, it's just I know aspects of them that I'm like, that is enough for me to know that this is likely going to land with me. There might be a couple that I've, know much more, but in case you're wondering why it's like, oh, he mentioned this and he didn't know that it also has this mechanic. That's probably why. There's an element I want to discover, that moment where I crack open the fresh box and sit down with the rulebook. That's just how I approach them. So in case you're wondering, just wanted to give you that context. Let's jump right into this. There's 9 games. Let's start with number 9, and number 9 is Root. Now, we've been asked a few times, myself and Carlo, about not having played Root, and that's true. We haven't played Root. We played Oath before we played Root. Carlo has Fort, and I think has played that. We still haven't played Root. So that's a big gap for us because Root is obviously a beloved game. It's talked about a lot. There's tons of expansions. It's pretty popular. The challenge with Root is that there is a bit of a barrier to being late to the party with Root, and that's because someone who's very experienced with Root, or even just has a moderate experience, is likely going to do much better than someone who is approaching Root for the very first time with very little context. And I'm worried that I'm going to end up in a situation with Root where I have a bad first experience just because of the other players at the table and their experience level with it, and then that's going to hamper my my thoughts on the game after the fact. I want to have a proper first Root experience, and one of our friends does own Root, and because of the pandemic, it just hasn't been a game we've been able to play yet. But I think there's an opportunity for myself, Carlo, and him to be able to sit down and do a 3-player game of Root where we'll all feel like on relatively the same playing field, and that'll be a great option to be able to explore all these factions and explore what the game has to offer. Because honestly, the fact that it has a bunch of asymmetrical. Carlo points this out to me all the time. I get flack for getting those two terms mixed up. So if you ever hear me say asynchronous when I mean asymmetrical, just point it out in the comments and berate me in the comments for it. Asymmetrical powers, it's something I love in games. Like, a more recent example would be Tidal Blades. The fact that it has the asymmetrical powers, and every time you approach the game, you can use a different character, a different faction, whatever the case may be in whatever game you're playing. That's something I love. I love the variability of it. I love that you can find your favorites. I love that you can, discover not only how to play yours, but how to play against everybody else. Root has that as one of its main attractions. So that is a huge selling point for me, on top of the fact that I am a fan of like the area control aspect of games, and games that use it as a heavy mechanic, especially when Root does it in such a different way than what you normally expect. You hear area control, and a lot of people's minds jump to Blood Rage and games like with a heavier theme, and Root does it in a very stylish, cartoonish way that I think is really unique. And so I know it's going to be a game I enjoy. The question is how much. So I'm really hoping to play Root soon. I think this should be the year that we'll finally be able to get to the table, and we'll see where it slots in, if it does, on my top 50 of all time. Moving on to number 8 is another game that this one I've been so close to buying this so many times, and one of these days I just have to put it in my damn shopping cart on one of the online stores I buy from, and that is Orleans. So this is a bag building game, and the only bag building game I have experience with is Quacks of Quedlinburg, and it's a very different game than that. Quacks is a push your luck game where you're just filling this bag with stuff, and the entire game comes around how much you want to keep pulling and pushing your luck out of it. Whereas Orleans, it's a bag builder, but you're not really pushing your luck. It's acting as a way to add some randomness into what you're drawing out, in the same way that a deck of cards would be random in terms of how they're organized. So no push your luck element, more so just how can you effectively build your bag to sort of minimize the luck and maximize the amount of time you're pulling the workers out that are more desirable to you. And what's really interesting about this game is that you have a sort of a slot that you can fit 8 of these workers that you're pulling out of the bag, but that 8 you're transitioning onto sort of a action spots on the board, and each action spot has a certain amount of workers you need to assign to it to be able to take that action. So this one may need these 3 specific types of workers, and you're going to have to be hoping you pull them from the bag, but obviously you can influence how often that happens by adding in more of those specific workers. And there's ways to also get, I don't know what they're called, but little tiles that basically cover up some of those required spots, so it costs you less workers to go to spots. So a lot of interesting stuff happening here. It incorporates a lot of elements of different games that I really enjoy. I'm expecting to love this game. I'm not sure where it'll rank in the top 50, or if it will eventually, crack it or whatnot, but I do think this is gonna be one that once I have it, I'm like, oh my God, why did I take so long to play this game? So that is number 8, Orleans. Number 7 is a game that we have recently been asked about, especially in our top 50. I think someone posted our the top 10 of our top 50 of all time to Reddit, and we even got asked in a Reddit comment about this game, and that is Concordia. So Concordia is a game neither of us has played, and one that I've been wanting to play for a while, but I will say that out of all the games on this list, it's most likely the one I will play the soonest, because Carlo actually owns a copy of Concordia. We just haven't actually committed to playing it. One of these days we'll just say, it's finally time, let's play Concordia. So Concordia has a nice big board, and it's basically a game of, in all the cities that are on the map, or all the locations that are on the map, you're establishing your cities and your footholds to essentially, find the most efficient way of getting points and maximize your points. But the interesting thing, the coolest thing about Concordia, the thing that attracts me to it, is these action cards. And I think they're called action cards. They might be called something else. Again, it's one of those things where I'll know when I have the rule book. But essentially, you start with certain ones that you have access to that will allow you to do different things in the game. And there's going to be new ones that are available. Some of them could be, duplicates. Some of them could be more efficient versions of cards you have. Some could be completely different ones compared to what you have. And you're getting those to be able to do different things, more things, better things on the board. And I like the idea of everything you do being controlled by these action cards and having to choose which ones you want to get and alter your play style according to that. In addition to the fact that with the way that it has the map and you're creating your cities and networks and gathering resources and things like that, it's mechanics we've seen a lot of games do, but for many of in my experience, I bet you Concordia was doing this before a lot of the games I've played, and I would like to see, the game that originated some of these. It's not originated, but did it before some of these other games did it, even if the other games, I think, did it better. It's the same thing as if I had never played Dominion, and I played a bunch of deck builders. That would be a gap for me because I want to go back and see, what game do these games owe it to, some of these mechanics. That's how I feel about some of these games on this list, specifically Concordia. I'd love to play it and kind of see where it lands for me, and I expect to play it this year. So next up on the list, this is a new version of a game that I love and that is on my top 50, and this is Clank Legacy. So Clank is a game that's really high in my top 50. I really love Clank. I've played a whole bunch of it. It is a deck builder I constantly go back to, and that I am constantly having different combinations of cards still come up. There's cards, I'm sure, because I have the expansion as well, one of the expansions, that there's cards in my massive stack of cards that I play with that I still haven't seen even come up during a game, or that I personally haven't bought in a game. So there's still so much for me to discover in that game. I'm also a huge fan of campaign and legacy games. The fact that Clank Legacy exists and I haven't played it yet is not at all because it's not a game I don't want to play. I desperately want to play this. It's more just having the time to sit down with a consistent group and play that same game. So Clank Legacy is one that is constantly on my radar. Every time I'm placing orders, I'm thinking, is this the time I put Clank Legacy in the cart? Do I have the time to commit to this? How close are we to the Frosthaven release? How close am I to the Oathsworn release, which are 2 campaign games I backed and I'm expecting? So I don't know when I'll eventually play this. I know that when I do, I'm likely going to really enjoy it given how much I love Clank. It's just a no-brainer, really. Again, it's one of those ones I haven't looked into specifically because I don't want to spoil myself for anything, especially in a legacy game, that I might discover about it. So I'm really, really aware of Clank Legacy and how many people love it and how high it is on BGG rankings and things like that, and how much I need to play this. It's just a matter of when. So that is Clank Legacy. Number 5 is a game that I only recently clued into that I would want this game. So I had heard about this game. I had heard it talked about, never really looked into the reception it was getting. I just sort of wrote it off because of my initial thoughts on the theme. And it was only in the last year of seeing how acclaimed it's becoming, how many people are talking about it, that I properly looked into it and immediately knew I needed to get this game. And that is Smartphone Inc. So Smartphone Inc., the reason the theme doesn't appeal to me is just, my initial judging a book by its cover and hearing Smartphone Inc. was just like, this is a theme about, more of like a modern take on cell phones, and really like I have a cell phone out of necessity. It's not because I love cell phones. Like, really, do I want to play this game? But having looked into it now, there's so many cool things going on in this game and so many mechanics and stuff that I am a fan of present here that I definitely need to buy this game really soon and start playing it. So I'm just going to mention my favorite thing about it. And one thing I had no idea was even featured. Basically, the way you decide what you're going to have access to on your turn in terms of like actions you're taking or how each phase is going to play out for you individually compared to other players is you have this screen, and behind your screen you have these 2 cards. The cards have icons on them, and you have to, at the start of your turn when you're preparing, place the cards on top of each other in some combination where at minimum what the card is covering 2 icons on top of the other card, but at maximum 4, and whatever icons are left being shown on top that essentially aren't covered, those are the icons that are going to translate to actions, things you can do on the subsequent phases of your turn. There's so many combinations and different configurations you might want to do depending on what you're going to try to accomplish. That is super exciting and super interesting, and it's only recently that I saw another game doing that, and that's Cafe that I just purchased. Has a similar system, not implemented the same way, but where you're covering icons with cards. So the fact that I had just seen that on Cafe and was like, oh, like that's the Smartphone Inc. mechanic is one of the reasons I'm like, how did I not dive into Smartphone Inc. sooner and give it a shot. On top of that, you're eventually able to get tiles that essentially now go on top of those cards and give you more icons that you normally wouldn't have access to. So that's only one element of the game, but the fact that that controls everything else that you're doing on your turns and that you have access to is really exciting to me. It's something new. I haven't seen that or played that in a game personally yet, so I'm really, really interested in this game. And then obviously from there, you're trying to sell the most cell phones. You're establishing yourself in different regions like Australia and Canada and things like that to be able to set up offices and sell your phones from and get different amounts of your product and things like that you're able to sell. There's a bunch of stuff going on, but the way it all is driven by this one starting mechanic is really neat. So that is Smartphone Inc. It is on my radar. I'm putting this in my cart in one of my next purchases for sure, and then it's just going to be a matter of dedicating time to sit down and play it. Moving on to number 4. This is probably the newest game on the list. I'm just going to double check. Yes, this is the newest game on the list, but it is getting way, way too much hype for me not to be aware of it, and I've looked into it ever since the hype started to get to astronomical levels, and realized that there's a lot going on here that, I should have been aware of this game earlier because I probably would have pre-ordered it, and now the pre-orders are all sold out, and that is Ark Nova. So this isn't so much a gap. This is like, I guess, the one exception on this list because it is available in some regions, I believe. Some people have played this, so I can't really fault myself too much for not having played it, but it's on this list less as like, this is a game, it's a gap in my collection that I should have played, and more that like once I have played this, I think I'm pretty confident you'll see this on my top 50, and that's because it's popping up on a lot of people's lists very high up. I think Dice Tower had it at like number 1, or Tom had it at number 1 on his all-time list. And looking into it, I mean, I grew up playing games like Zoo Tycoon, where you're building your own zoo. I loved Zoo Tycoon. I loved those simulation games like Roller Coaster Tycoon and SimCity and all that kind of stuff. The fact that Ark Nova is allowing you to build your own zoo, but with having to manage how much space an animal takes up, and so and in your personal park, and also this animal will take up this much spaces in your park, but if you put it into an enclosure, a reptile enclosure for instance, it takes up less spots, and you put some cubes on the enclosure to indicate where it is. Like, it's very neat, and it looks great on the table, and that whole theme really resonates with me. So again, it's one of those games that I haven't sat down and read the entire rule book, so I don't know the entire flow of how it plays, but I've watched snippets of some how it plays and looked at some different like images online and some snippets of the rulebook as well to sort of get a feel of the mechanics involved, and everything I see I love. Honestly, the one thing that really stopped me from looking into Ark Nova sooner, and it's the same thing Carlo mentioned as well, is I don't think either of us is the biggest fan of the art style, and not the art style, but the use of like real imagery on the cover and the cards and stuff. I'm a much bigger fan of actually seeing like art and having a sort of style that is not reminiscent or not extracted from real life in board games. It's the same thing. It's a mind. I mean, this is literally just me talking, but it's the same thing as when I play any licensed games. Like I just played in the last month, I played Harry Potter Death Eaters Rising. The aspect of just having characters from the movies, like their images, actually the actors on the cards, is a turnoff for me, compared to if they would have gone like a stylized cartoon version, much in the same way that if Marvel Champions was just images of like Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, it would actually be a turnoff for me compared to the artwork. It's just a personal preference for me. So that's something about Ark Nova that I think made me think, oh, like I'm interested in it. There's some cool things, but I'm not going to put a lot of thought into it right now. And now, having heard the hype, I mean, I guess I've just been pulled in by the hype. So I'm pretty confident that it's going to be a game I enjoy. Having looked into it more, I love everything about it. It's just literally now a matter of, can I get my hands on it? When can I get my hands on it? So I'm keeping my eyes on all the retailers. I'm keeping my eyes on pretty much like every pre-order page and everything I can to be able to get myself a copy as soon as possible. I imagine it's going to be a while. It's going to be hard to get, but when we do, I will play it and I will let you know all my thoughts. Number 3 on the list is a game that I wish so much that I would have backed when I had the chance, when the campaign was going on, because now it's been absolutely impossible to find. Luckily, I have heard that they are going to be doing an official reprint that you'll be able to pre-order, which I'm going to jump on as soon as I can, and that is Dwellings of Eldervale. So this game is one that not only does the theme speak to me, but the fact that worker placement games are one of my favorite genres is another bonus on top of that, and it does some interesting stuff with having sort of a hexagon style grid layout that is going to change over time, or have things added onto it, that you're going to be adding different workers on to take the actions of these different grids as you go. But at the same time, I believe it's that, and again, it's one of those things where because I don't look into every element of the game, I might be remembering this incorrectly, but I'm pretty sure that you start with a different faction or character or whatever it is in this game, depending on which one you want to start with, and each one has a different affinity, essentially, for an element, and there's basically an element track it's sort of this circular board, or at least it has a circular element to it with all the different elements, and you have a limited number of cubes that you're going to be able to add onto this to have sort of your affinity to these different elements change over time and increase. You could potentially prioritize all of yours into higher levels in a single element, or you could diversify and go into a bunch of different elements. And then depending on how you do that, it's going to affect what strategy you take in the game. It comes with unbelievable inserts, like the component trays and all that kind of stuff. The deluxe version is beautiful, the way everything is stored. I'm a huge fan of inserts. You probably know that about me if you've watched some other videos or you've been in the Discord. That's something I really appreciate in games when they're done well. It's one of the reasons I started storing my games horizontally again, so that I wouldn't have to be upset at the inserts for spilling out. I could actually appreciate them for the way that they're supposed to function. So it looks gorgeous. The actual artwork is ridiculously gorgeous as well. And of course, the theme is just something that speaks to me, that fantasy inspired theme. Everything hits the right marks. The thing that really put it over the edge for me has just been the reception from people. Everyone I've talked to, and especially over the last month in our Discord, people have been raving about this game. There's been some photos of it set up on the table, making me uber jealous. I honestly just know that I'm going to enjoy this game so much. It's just a matter of how much. And this is, out of almost every game on this list, this is the one that applies to that rule I talked about at the start of the video the most, in terms of not wanting to look too much into the game and wanting to experience that when I get it in front of me and can open the box. I could absolutely go through the rule book, read every single rule, but I'm so certain from what I've seen that I'm going to enjoy this game that, one, it's going to make the wait more grueling. I'm probably going to have to wait until the fall at least to get this game. And two, I want that experience. I want to open up the box and check out all these components for myself and not even maybe have realized some of the components or the trays that it comes with. I want to set up the entire game, give myself an hour and just spend it to reading the rule book and doing a couple mock turns and everything. That's the experience I'm most looking forward to, aside from obviously playing with people, is that initial discovery phase. And this is one of those games that I know is going to be an absolute joy to do so. As soon as I get it in, I'm going to set aside the time and just explore this game for what it has. So that is Dwellings of Elder. I always want to say Dwellings of Everdell, and I'm pretty sure this is not an uncommon thing, but it's Dwellings of Eldervale, although now you would think they want to do some sort of crossover where they do Dwellings of Everdell, because enough people are mistaking it that eventually it's just going to become that game. But anyways, Dwellings of Eldervale, that's my number 3. Number 2 on the list is an Uwe Rosenberg game. There are a couple that we haven't played, but there's one specifically that I am fairly confident will end up on my top 50 somewhere, and likely very high up, because even a game like Hallertau, which was high up, I have a feeling this game I'm going to like more than Hallertau. So, and I could be wrong, you never know, but I am a huge Uwe fan, and this is one I've been wanting to play for a while, and that's Le Havre. So Le Havre is classic Uwe fashion. You're gathering resources, you're spending resources, you're building buildings. The way it does it with sort of this river, stream, it's one of the two, it's some sort of body of water, and having to sort of move along it and reveal tiles to see like what resources are being added to the board, and then also be able to buy these buildings that you're constructing. It does a lot of Uwe things, so to speak, but it's with a fresh coat of paint. And again, it's one of those games too that in the past I looked into very heavily, because I considered buying it I think a couple years ago, and I did the full, I looked right into it. I think this might have even been before I even bought A Feast for Odin, where I was really trying to say, hey, am I going to spend all this money on this big box game? I need to, have a better handle of the rules. Over time, I've forgotten the rules, but I remember aspects of it. But having played so many more Uwe Rosenberg games and never disliking any of them, I know for a fact I will like this game. The question for me is it going to surprise me how much I like this? Is there any chance that this could end up dethroning A Feast for Odin? Am I going to enjoy it more than A Feast? Probably not, and that's going to be really hard to accomplish. But games like Hallertau, which are high up and everything, probably. And there's other games we haven't played from Uwe, like Caverna, which is another one that I thought about including on this list. But honestly, Caverna I could see myself enjoying, but not wanting to, say, oh, it's one of my top 50 games of all time. Le Havre, I just feel like there's a very certain chance it ends up somewhere on that list. It's just a matter of where. So this is one that I recognize as a gap, and every time we do the jokes in our Discord and on YouTube comments about Team Agricola and Team Feast, we have every so often someone commenting with, what about Team Le Havre? What about Team Caverna? I'm well aware that Team Le Havre could absolutely become a thing one day, and to find out if it does, I need to play this game. So it's on my list. Carlo considered buying it really recently when it was available at an online retailer and ended up not buying it. One of us will buy it soon. We'll finally play it and we'll find out where it ranks. The last one, which you may be expecting if you've had these conversations with me in the Discord or you've seen me comment on other videos in the past, this is one I am certain I'm going to love, and it's just a matter of when I play it, and that is Terra Mystica. So Terra Mystica has an a theme that absolutely resonates with me. I love the theme, and it has all the different factions in this fantasy realm that you would expect from fantasy games. And each one, although they might not be as asymmetrical as some games in terms of the powers and things they bring, they do have their own unique approach in terms of this sort of circular wheel of different terrain types, and each one is favoring a different terrain and also can influence other terrain more easily or more difficultly depending on this wheel. So you basically have this large board of different terrain types. You're establishing where you start the game, and then you're basically I keep saying basically. I think someone commented recently saying, how many times did you guys say basically? And I'm just realizing I just don't stop saying it. We need to take a shot every time I say basically, every time I mention Feast for Odin. There's so many things we do without realizing. Essentially, you have this board of all these different terrain types, and you're going to be adding buildings onto them, and those buildings can be upgraded over time from these smaller ones to, I don't know the names of them all, but it would be from as if you were going from like a village to a city, things like that. Those aren't what they're called, but you're upgrading these buildings, and you're able to also sort of terraform the land around you, and depending on what terrain it is, it's going to dictate how many of these, I think, shovels you need to spend, or some sort of resource you have to spend to be able to terraform areas around you, and that's going to allow you to build your buildings on it. And it's sort of, I think, in many ways, trying to vie for different territory with your opponents. So Terra Mystica, honestly, the reason I haven't played it is once Gaia Project came out, lots of people said Gaia Project took Terra Mystica. It very much is a re-implementation with a different theme, but it also upgraded a lot of things about it, improved a lot of things about it. There's a modular board, from what I understand, or a modular setup. And so in many ways, I've heard that it's a better experience. It's a better version of Terra Mystica, but with a completely different theme. And for me, unfortunately, the theme of Terra Mystica is such a draw to me, and the theme of Gaia Project isn't, that now I've wondered, oh man, like, which one do I play first? And I've wavered so many times. Do I play the one that is potentially a better version but isn't going to land with the theme? Do I play Terra Mystica and never play Gaia Project because of that? And then I found out that apparently there's a new version of Terra Mystica in development. I think it's called Terra Mystica Age of Innovation or Terra Mystica Innovation. I featured in a video recently, and it's, I think, going to be a new re-implementation of Terra Mystica with that theme, hopefully bringing over many of the things from Gaia Project as improvements, and that might be the perfect place for me to start and have really no excuse not to play this game. So the downside to that is now I'm waiting even longer to play this game. I've decided I'm just going to wait to find out more about this version to confirm it's coming out, and then to eventually play this version. If anything changes there, I'll probably just get the original Terra Mystica, but that's sort of where I stand with it now. I am certain this game will not only end up in my top 50, but I bet you in the top 25 there's a good chance, unless it ends up somehow completely flopping for me compared to what I'm expecting. From everything I've read, from everything I've tried, I think at one point I even did the full tutorial on the digital version without actually playing a game, just to learn how it plays. And I loved everything about it. So I really want to play this game. I'm hoping I get to play it soon. As soon as we find out more about this new version of Terra Mystica, I'm going to be ecstatic because I want to know that it is something, whether it's something I should be waiting for, whether I should just play the original. Let me know your thoughts, especially on the Gaia Project Terra Mystica debate, because I've heard people on both sides. Some agree with me, some say that, if you can get over the theme, Gaia Project's the better game. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear it. Those are the 9 games. So those are 9 games that I have not played that I am expecting to absolutely adore in one way or another, potentially enough to end up in my top 50. Which games have you guys not played that you've heard other people talk about that you're like, oh, you know what? I know once I play that game, I'm not going to put it down, but for one reason or another, you just haven't taken the plunge yet. And let me know what the reasons are. If it is an expense thing, is it a time commitment thing? Is there a part of you that is worried about being disappointed after you're so certain you're going to love it? I'd love to hear from you. Let me know your games in the comments. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching this video. If you'd like to join us on our Discord channel and talk about a bunch of these things, see photos of my dog and other people's pets, talk about video games, talk about other board games, ask us questions, have exclusive access to myself and Carlo, join the Discord below. It's free to do so. You just have to have an account. You can talk with us on all the channels there. No expense to you. It's just a way to engage with us in the community. If you do want to support us in any way, also check the description. There's a link for Patreon, merchandise, PayPal link, different options. None of it mandatory, but in case you were wondering, it's all there. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.